Ever heard of the TV show Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends? I'm sure you have. I was and still am a massive fan of the show. I've read the entirety of the Railway series books. I've also watched the entirety of the Model series, including the later hit Entertainment series, despite the fact that those series are the worst of the Model series. I've even watched some of the CGI series as well. After hearing everything I've just told you so far, you can definitely tell that I'm a massive fan of Thomas. However, after what I've experienced, I don't think I'll be able to look at the Model era of Thomas the same way ever again. So one day, I was on the Thomas the Tank Engine Wiki fandom. I was looking at all the episodes from Series 11, which is the final series that completely used the models before the showrunners started switching to CGI. All of the episodes in the list were there, except one. When I looked at the final episode, instead of it having Series 11, Episode 26, Dina Ling, instead it had, Series 11, Episode 26, 5 Evil Engines. I was a little bit confused, but ultimately I didn't think much of it. I just thought maybe whoever created this list must have put that down as a joke, so I just went about my normal daily life after that. However, as the days went by, what I saw at the bottom of that list troubled me so much that eventually I had to do something about it. So after days of trying, I managed to get in touch with the director of Thomas at the time Series 11 was airing, Stephen Asquith. I got on a phone call with him and we began chatting. At first I was just asking him simple questions like, what was it like working on Thomas, and what was it like to actually be directing the show, and etc. However, when I got to my last question, which was about the episode that I had found in the list on the wiki, he paused for a long time, and when he did finally speak, he was stuttering a lot and sounded very uncomfortable. He asked me where I had found the episode, and I told him. At first he brushed it off, telling me that whoever made the list must have put in there as a joke, which is what I initially thought. However, after I questioned him a bit more, I heard him sigh on the other end of the phone, and then he finally told me the truth. Apparently, when they were making the 11th series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, the team knew that it would be the last time that the show would be entirely made using models. Also, a lot of the team, including Stephen Asquith, was very unhappy with the way the show was headed, as were a lot of fans of the show, including me. So when it came time for them to start production of the final episode of the series, to show their displeasure with the way the show was heading, they decided to make the final episode absolutely horrible. Steve explained that their goal was to get the show cancelled with this episode. The reason why they wanted to do this was to prevent the show from going downhill any further than it already had. However, after they had completed the episode and showed it to Sharon Miller, who was the writer for the last episode, she was quite appalled by the contents of the video, the language that was used, and also that we had not adapted the story that she wrote and came up with our own idea. So she made us write the story she had wrote, and then after that, a lot of the team were fired and the video we created that wasn't what she wrote never aired. I was very surprised after I heard this story. I asked Steve if he had a copy of the episode, and he said yes. He said he had a copy of the episode that had been lying up in his loft years and that he hadn't watched it since him and the team created the episode. I immediately asked him if he could send it to me because I wanted to watch it. He was very reluctant at first, warning me that I would not want to see it because it would ruin my childhood, but I insisted that I wanted to see it. Eventually he relented, and told me that he would send me a copy of it. I wish now that I had heeded his warning. A few days later, a postman came and delivered a package to me. I looked on the label and it said, "This is a copy of the lost episode of Series 11 of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. It is called 5 Evil Engines. What at your own risk." I was only slightly nervous after reading that, but my nervousness was completely drowned out by excitement that I was about to watch a never before seen by the public episode of Thomas from Series 11. I opened up the package, and there was a plain translucent DVD box with a plain DVD inside. I took the DVD out of the box, put it in the DVD player and turned the TV on. There was no menu screen, it just went straight to the episode. The intro was familiar, however it was extremely unsettling. The music was pitched down very low and there was no children's choir singing. The sky was gray and dark, the windmill was all dilapidated and dirty, the watermill was almost entirely destroyed, and instead of a kid on top of the bridge with his bike waving to Thomas as he passed under it, there was a miserable old homeless man smoking weed on top of it. What was most unsettling though was Thomas's face. It looked like they had created a face that was half his angry face, and half his normal happy face. The episode then started. It started out by showing tied mouth sheds, however something was off. Emily and Henry were nowhere to be found, and there were only 5 engines in the shed. Thomas, Percy, James, Gordon, and Edward, They all had faces that looked like half their angry faces and half their normal faces, and they all had weird voices for some reason. I could tell that they were being voiced by the same narrator who they had been voiced by for years, Michelangelo's, but for whatever reason, he was putting on weird voices for the characters. Thomas sounded like an edgy American teenager. Percy sounded like Michael Brandon's loud French accent that he gave to the painter in the American dub of the Series 9 episode, Percy and the Oil Painting. James sounded like he had an Indian accent, Gordon had a London Cockney accent, and Edward had a Russian accent. Thomas spoke first. "So guys, what are we gonna do today?" he asked. "I don't know, Thomas," said Percy. "What do you want to do?" Well, my friends," said James suddenly, "if you ask me what I'd like to do, I'd quite like to pull the express." "Oi," yelled Gordon suddenly, "who the bloody hell do you think you are? Taking the express is my job." James and Gordon then started arguing, and Edward tries to calm them down. "Stop this right now, comrades," he yelled, which shutted Edward and Gordon right up. Thomas then just suggested they all just do their work for the day, and everyone agrees. Then one by one the engines all leave the shed, turn around on the turntable and head out to do their work. After every engine is gone, it then fades to each engine doing their work. The first scene shows Thomas who was shunting trucks at Knapford Station. The first few seconds of the scene seems about as normal as it could be. However, a few seconds into the scene, Thomas takes a truck from the station far out onto the line so that he can put into the siding. As soon as he is out far enough, the camera cuts to a close-up of his face and he starts laughing maniacally and speeding up. It then shows a close-up of the truck's face, and he looks absolutely terrified. He begs and pleads with Thomas to stop, but Thomas just keeps laughing louder and louder, and keeps going faster and faster. He races into the siding with the truck at full speed, and as soon as the truck hits the buffers, it explodes into 1,000 little pieces. It then cuts back to Thomas, still laughing like a lunatic and covered in bits of wood from the truck. He quickly rushes away, and then it fades to the next scene. The next scene shows Percy puffing down the line. He's not pulling any train, not even the mail train, he's just all by himself. It then cuts to a level crossing with a horse and cart with a family crossing it and the barriers for the trains down. Percy blows his whistle at full power, which scares the horse and causes it to freak out. The man who was controlling the horse leans over and starts yelling angrily and cursing Percy out for doing what he did. Percy then also starts laughing maniacally and speeding up, like Thomas did in the last scene. The family that's inside the cart then starts screaming, crying and pleading with Percy to stop, but Percy doesn't listen. He plows through the crossing gates, crashes into the cart, breaking it into 1,000,000 little pieces, and then carries on at full speed, his maniacal laughter echoing in the distance. It then cuts to the destroyed cart. Little bits of wood and shards of glass are all over the place, and worst of all, the mutilated remains of the family are lying all over the tracks. Their limbs and their heads are all completely severed off, and what looks like actual blood is coming out of them. I had to pause the video for a few seconds to catch myself so that I didn't puke. It was absolutely disgusting. It then faded to the next scene. The next scene showed James, who was pulling a train of empty trucks on the Farquhar branch line, which was strange, because the Farquhar branch line is Thomas's branch line, and also, they never used or even mentioned it at all during the hit era, so why did they have it now? Anyway, James was puffing down the line with his train of empty trucks, when all of a sudden, he came up to the level crossing that's on the Farquhar branch line. Bertie the bus was broken down on the crossing and the barriers for the train were down. James then blew his whistle, and Bertie looked over. However, just like with Thomas and Percy in the previous scenes, instead of stopping, James started laughing maniacally and speeding up. Bertie pleaded with James to stop, and all of his passengers were so terrified that they were screaming and banging on the door trying desperately to get out. But James didn't listen. He plowed through the barriers and crashed into Bertie, severely damaging not just Bertie, but also himself, and sending Bertie flying into a field full of cows. James then continued on at full speed despite being quite damaged, his maniacal laughter also echoing in the distance. The camera then slowly panned over to Bertie, who was severely damaged and lying on his side in a field full of cows. All of his windows were shattered and he was screaming in both sheer agony and terror. And worst of all of his passengers were dangling out of his shattered windows dead, and covered with blood. I lost it then. I paused the video a second time and ran to my toilet as fast as I could to let out all of my food. That scene made me so ill. At that point, I didn't want to keep watching the video, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I continued watching. It then faded to the next scene, which was of a tunnel, then showed the front of a line of express coaches coming out of the tunnel, and at the end of the line of coaches was Gordon. Instead of pulling the express, He was pushing it. There'd better not be any people in those coaches, I said out loud to myself, quivering with fear. However, then it cut to inside the coach, and there was another family of 4 in there. After I saw that, I then sighed and said to myself, of course, there just had to be people in there, didn't there? Looking back, I seriously didn't know what I was expecting. Anyway, just like with the previous scenes, it then cut back to Gordon, who also started laughing and going faster. It then cut to a scene of a cliff with some more buffer stops at the top of it. Then it cut back to inside the coaches with everyone in the coaches screaming with terror and trying desperately to escape. It then cuts back to the cliff as Gordon crashes the express through the buffer stops and sending it tumbling off the cliff and onto the rocks below. He then stops just before the cliff and looks down at the crime that he committed, still laughing maniacally and louder than ever. It then cut to the bottom of the cliff, but I quickly looked away as I didn't want to witness another gory scene. Luckily the scene didn't last long and it then faded to the next scene. The next scene showed yet another random scene with railway line on them, typical of the hit era. It then showed Edward puffing down the line with a train of empty coaches, and I know that because it cut to a scene inside the coaches which showed them to be completely empty. It then cut to a scene with another level crossing, and Trevor the traction engine and his owner, Jem Cole, crossing it. And just like with all the other characters, Edward started laughing maniacally and speeding up. Trevor and Jem both looked over at Edward and gasped with horror. Jem tried to make Trevor go faster, but there was nothing he could do that would get them both out of the way in time. He jumped clear just in time as Edward crashed into Trevor, resulting in a massive firing explosion that damaged both Edward and Trevor, and injuring Jem. This was the most terrifying scene so far. After the crash, there was no laughter, and no screaming. There was only the sound of fire, police and fire engine sirens, and eerie music playing in the background. The scene lasted for maybe around half a minute, before it finally faded to the next scene. All 5 engines were back at Tidemouth sheds, still damaged and with bits of wood and glass on them after they had committed their crimes, with Edward sitting on top of the breakdown train on the turntable, and the fat controller had arrived. Unacceptable, he yelled angrily. His face was red with rage. Not only have you caused severe damage to both your fellow engines and vehicles and railway property, but you have also severely injured the public that lost dozens of innocent lives. I will not tolerate this bad of behavior from my engines. Tomorrow I shall be sending you for scrap. He then left in his iconic blue car to go home. Don't listen to him, guys, said Thomas to the other engines. That bastard can't do shit to us and he knows it. He's all mouth and no action, he continued. It then cut to the next scene, which was inside the smelter's shed, so it was obviously the next day. It showed all 5 engines being lined up ready to be scrapped and thrown into the big bowl of molten metal, with Thomas in front, still with his evil smiling face. It then showed the scrappers with their torches, about to scrap Thomas. Then it cut to outside the smelter shed as it played the sound of Thomas being scrapped and him screaming in agony as it happened. This went on for a few minutes, until finally after all 5 engines were scrapped, it showed the inside of the bowl of molten metal, and it showed all of the characters' faces, and as the camera zoomed in on Thomas's face, it smiled. And then the episode ended. No credits scene, nothing, it just ended. I immediately took the DVD out of the DVD player, put it back in its DVD box, went outside and threw the fucking thing in the bin. I was absolutely traumatized at everything I had just seen. That night when I went to bed, I got to sleep perfectly fine, but I had the worst nightmare I've ever had. I had a nightmare that all the things that happened to all the people in the video happened to me as well. I had a dream of Percy crashing into the cart on the level crossing and killing me inside of it, and also of James crashing into Bertie on the Farquhar branch line level crossing and leaving dangling out of his shattered window and dead and covered in blood, and also of being trapped inside the express with Gordon pushing it off the cliff and making it crash down on the rocks below and killing me inside, and etc. I tried talking to Stephen Asquith about it again the next day, but he still hasn't responded to my messages I sent him. I'm still a Thomas fan, always have been, and always will be. But the memory of everything I saw in the never-before-seen episode is something that will never leave me. If you ever come across an episode of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends called 5 Evil Engines, then whatever you do, don't ever watch it.